session is always an open session in IMA. And the first day's last session has to be something very special. Can we have the AV of Mr. Mark Fritz, please?
Mark Fritz, Managing Director, Procedor. Author, The Truth About Getting Things Done. A business leader who is truly unique. We welcome Mr. Mark Fritz today. He is an international speaker and Managing Director of Procedor, an international consultancy focused on helping international business leaders achieve even greater success in leading across distances and cultures. Mr. Fritz has lived and worked across the world and speaks regularly on the power of ownership in leading today's organizations. He has taught at business schools throughout Europe and teaches extensively at the IE Business School in Madrid, Spain. He is also the author of 2 inspiring books, The Truth About Getting Things Done and Time to Get Started. We are happy to have Mark Fritz with us today.
In a true traditional Indian welcome, I would now request Mr. Alok Jain to please do the floral welcome Mr. Mark Fritz, please. I would now hand over the stage to Mark for his speech here, please.
Good afternoon, everybody. Come on, you can do better than that. Good afternoon, everybody. There you go. You know, us Americans are the rah-rah people, you know, so you have to expect that from us, right? I always love what Winston Churchill said about the Americans. He said, the Americans will always do the right thing, but only after doing all the wrong things first. So I guess I was a good American because I made a lot of mistakes in my career. But I learned a lot, so I kept moving forward, okay? So today what I'd like to do is I'd like to share a little bit about the power of ownership for you. And this is really around, you know, how you can use ownership in leadership to manage people across distance, cultures, or to manage anybody from anywhere, okay? So these are core leadership skills that are so important for you to use that you can lead almost anybody from anywhere. And we're going to cover an introduction. I'll give you a little bit more about myself. We're going to talk about a mindset that's critical to be successful this way. And then we're going to talk about 3 parts of personal ownership. First, which is leading yourself first, enabling personal ownership in others, enabling your people to lead themselves, and then enabling team and organizational ownership, meaning getting the collaboration to work. So I'll give you 3 ideas in each of those as we move forward, okay? And the first thing, just to give you an idea about myself, I'm an American, but I'm married to a Japanese. So I live the extreme of culture on a daily basis. Everything in between doesn't seem so bad when you live the extreme at home. And I spent 25 years with Kodak. To just give you an indication, when I was in my 20s, late 20s, I would install homegrown enterprise systems in Kodak companies around the world. So I did this in Egypt, I did it in the Netherlands, in Japan. And I would go in and maybe 9 months or so, lead a team to train everybody up in the operation on a new system. On a Friday afternoon, I would convert all the data. On Monday morning, everybody in the whole operations is doing something different. I did that 3 times. It's sort of the big bang approach to enterprise systems. So I learned 2 things. One, I learned business top to bottom and left to right, because you have to adapt the software to each business condition. And the second, I learned the stress of Monday morning. The system better work, or you're in trouble. And that's why I have all this gray hair right now, early in my career. I'm the managing director of Procedor, which is focused on this in terms of leading across cultures. And I'm a professor at schools in sort of leading across distances and cultures. Basically, distance and culture is the acid test for leadership. You cannot manage people at a distance. You cannot firefight. You cannot see what they're doing. You cannot tell them what to do. You have to lead them. You have to point out what they need to achieve. You have to help them be successful. So you cannot manage your way to success. You have to lead the people. So really, distance and culture is the acid test for leadership. This one. Okay. Now, I'd like to start out first is that in today's world, there's no answers. There's only options. If you think about today's world, we are very, very complex. We have globalization happening. And we are very uncertain times in terms of the economy and things like that. In this type of world, there's only options. Years and years ago, we had a much simpler world. You almost could find the answer to those things because it was less complex, it was less uncertain, and actually leaders could tell their people what to do because they had the answer. In today's world, it's so complex, leaders do not have all the answers. In fact, they cannot make decisions on all the options because business is going so fast. The most successful companies, they enable their people to look at the different options, and they give them the confidence to take a decision, take the risks, and drive forward with those options. If your people are not taking the decisions and taking risks on those options, then basically they're asking you, the leader, to make all those decisions. If you're making the decisions, your organization is running at the pace of you, the leader, or the mindset or the abilities of you, the leader, and you're not leveraging your whole organization. So there's only options. There's not answers. And you want to enable your people with the confidence to go after, take the risks, take the decisions, and address those options right away. Because if your company is not doing that, the other company they are going to be moving faster beyond you, okay? So it's very important that way. Just as an aside, just an information, if you look down in the bottom left corner, say 200 to 300 years ago, the average person experienced in their whole lifetime, okay, what is equivalent in terms of information and everything and so forth. They experienced in their whole lifetime what exists in one Sunday newspaper today. So think about the information we have to integrate and everything like that. Our world is infinitely complex than it was years and years ago. And in some ways, the human mind hasn't picked up on that. That's why clarity of focus and what we're doing is so important these days. Being very clear about what we want to accomplish, okay? So just think about that. There's no options. There's only answers. We have to pick an option, make a decision, and keep heading forward, okay? The other thing about this is that when you listen to the speakers today, there are some very powerful messages, very inspirational, lots of ideas. But unless we change something we do daily and weekly, we're not really changing something fundamental in our life. So the best thing you can do after today, or even after, reflect on today and say, how could I apply what I heard today to my life? What could I change in a habit that I either do daily or weekly, and that would make the biggest difference? And I start this out on almost everything I do these days because I say, if you start and you hear something from me, you say, that's very interesting, or, I think I can use that. Stop and ask yourself, how would you apply it to your life? Because unless you're making a habit that's daily or weekly, you're not making a fundamental change to your life, okay? Very interesting, too, is that you can create a habit very, very quickly if you have the discipline. Okay? Years ago, when NASA was putting astronauts into space initially, they wanted to figure out how would they handle the fact that there'd be weightlessness and things would be upside down. So what they did is they gave goggles for the astronauts, the future astronauts, to wear. And these goggles would flip the image upside down. And they made them wear them 24 hours a day. so that they're looking at an upside-down image and so forth. And at first, the astronauts were very nervous. Their blood pressure was up because it was very, disconcerting to look at something upside down. And they had to leave them on, they'd sleep with them, they'd do everything they did every day with these goggles, having the image upside down. On the 26th day, the first astronaut, the image flipped right side up. The brain rewired so that he could see a right image. So in essence, sometimes for ourselves, we have to create a new normal. And for the astronauts, they created a new normal. 3 days later, another astronaut's image flipped. So they created a new normal in the brain that way. That's why when they hear a lot of times you need 21 days or 28 days or so forth to create a habit. If you commit yourself for 30 to 45 days to do something every single day, you will rewire your brain and have a habit for life. All it takes is the discipline of 30 to 45 days. So when you think about anything you hear today, reflect upon it. How would I apply this to my life? And if it's a very important habit, commit 30 to 45 days and you wire your brain for a new normal. Okay? So I give you that as something there because as a leader, it's important for us to keep growing and creating new habits. And it's important for us to encourage the new habits in our people. So if we're not creating new habits for ourselves, we're not being the role model for our people. Okay? So that's the thing there. Change equals growth that way. Okay? Now the mindset. And this is fundamental to the ownership concept, to focus on outcomes and create ownership, and particularly to focus on the outcomes. And I'm going to tell you an interesting story which illustrates this. When I heard this story, I actually flew to San Francisco to hear the person from this story. So the story I'm going to tell you about is a general who took over the Tactical Air Command in the U.S. Air Force. He took over 2 years before the first Gulf War. Okay, so this is before Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. And when he took over this group, about 170,000 people spread around the world responsible to repair airplanes. It was a Tactical Air Command in the U.S. Air Force. When they took over, they were organized by function. So all the mechanical engineering people were in one group. All the supply were in one group. All the avionics, software people were in one group. All the engine were, preparing the engine were in one group, etc. Weapons, etc. And they were called to repair their airplane with sophisticated computer systems. So you go here, you go there, etc. Taking a long time to repair the airplane. And the general said, this is crazy. He says, it's taken too long. So what he did is he created teams. He put all the disciplines needed to repair an airplane in a team. He said, these are your 25 planes, keep them flying. Created another team. These are your 25 planes, keep them flying. He's created teams all around the world, 25 teams repairing 25 airplanes. They increased flying time, I think, by 3 times or something like that. So they could fly sorties in that war all the time, and they actually bought less airplanes because they had airplanes flying more. Now the general went around to all the different places that made the changes, and he asked them a question. How do you like the new way of working? And one team member asked a question back to the general. When is the last time you washed a rental car? Has anybody here ever washed a rental car? No hands. Why do you never wash a rental car? It's not yours, right? And this team member said to the general, he said, we did not care if the plane was flying. They did not care about the outcome. They only worried about, did they load the weapons, did they repair the avionics, etc. There's a huge difference between having an outcome focus, which is related to achievement, and having an activity focus, which is related to busyness. In essence, when you're as a leader, you're constantly talking in outcomes, you're talking in the language of achievement. If you're talking in activities to your people, you're talking in the language of busyness. Huge difference. The very best leaders are constantly talking about outcomes, what needs to be achieved, and saying what are the next actions that are going to take us there. Leadership is quite simple in that you're focused on outcomes and you're focused on progress towards those outcomes. And you're getting your people to help you that way. Okay? It's really the language of achievement. It aligns everybody. Now let me ask you a question. How many times, whether you're in school or you're in business, etc., and you're asked to come to a meeting, they come to you and they say, we need a meeting to discuss this. How many times do you hear that? Raise your hand if you hear that a lot of time. Huh? No? Because discussion is an activity. It's not an outcome. Okay? When you're focusing things on discussion, it's just that. It's an activity, it's not an outcome. So the more you're outcome focused, okay, the more you're setting a meeting for the outcome, the more you're going to get the meeting and what you want to achieve. In other words, a meeting only has 3 outcomes. You either have a decision, agreed decision, an agreed action, or everybody understanding the issue exactly the same way so that they take consistent action. So the more you focused on outcomes, you're focused on achievement. Okay? Outcome focus, in discussing outcomes, you get people to own achievement. If you delegate activities, you get people to own just busyness this way. Okay? Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay. The second one is the ultimate outcome, which is defining success. We heard about success this morning. It's so important to define success, and I define success in 2 ways. Success is both a destination, where you want to get to, but it's also a journey, how you want to live your life on the way towards that destination. Some people make it only the destination, but then you're only happy for the split second that you've achieved that. It's also having a vision of where you want to go and how you want to live your life. The more you have clarity on what your success is, how you want to live your life, and what you want to achieve, the more you're going to see the opportunities to achieve that. Okay? The most important word, I think, in any language is the word clarity. Clarity is very important to me because when you're not clear on something, you're not taking as much action on that as you could. So if you think about a leader's position, as a leader, you really want to know what success is, and you want to have a clear picture of what success is. The more clear it's in your mind, the more powerful your communications about what you want to achieve as a team and a group, and how you talk to your people. There's one preacher in the United States that said, if it's a mist in the pulpit up front, it's a fog in the pew. So if it's not clear with the leader, it doesn't have a prayer about being clear, other words. Now, if you think about success as a leader, it's both the results you want to achieve, but it's also the behaviors in your people that enable you to achieve those results and to repeat those results over time. That's why in the corporate world, you have a lot of times where you have people who want a job for 18 months. Because you can push the results through for 18 months, but you don't have the behaviors in place to repeat it and to be able to expand on that and deliver even better results. So leaders focus on behaviors and the success they want to achieve. So it's extremely important that way. Okay? Now, the equation of success is why has to be greater than how. So think about this for your life. Whenever you wanted to try and achieve something, and the why wasn't so strong and the how was difficult, you just didn't achieve it. take an example of a person who wanted to quit smoking. The why is there, the how is very, very difficult, and they're struggling to do that. But suddenly they go into their doctor and the doctor says, you have a spot on your lung. Now the why is huge and the how doesn't seem such a problem anymore. So they say that the leaders are the why people. In fact, you can change the words in terms of chief executive officer to chief explaining officer, CEO. Their job is to explain the why. The what is from the management and the how is from the people, that way. So the CEO is the chief explaining officer. So the more you have in your mind this equation of why greater than how, you almost can predict your behavior of your people. Because if they don't understand the why, it's going to be difficult for them to take on a difficult how. Okay, you've seen it in your own life and so forth. Sometimes you had something very difficult to do, but you had a tremendous why, a reason, a passion behind it, and you did it. And that's the major difference. Why greater than how. Okay? And you need that clarity of what that why is. The more clear it is for you, the more clear you'll communicate to your people. Now, how you do this is make sure that you communicate the why to your key people and you attach it to their personal why. When you attach an organization why to the why of your key people, the magic happens. So that's the key that you want to do that way. Okay? So you have to define success for you and your organization. Now, let me ask you a question here. There's two types of people. First type of person, focuses on enjoyable activities. The second type of person focuses on enjoyable results. Which one do you think is more successful? The one who focuses on enjoyable activities or the one who focuses on enjoyable results? What do you think? How many say enjoyable activities? Okay, we got that here. How many say enjoyable results? Half and half. I'm sorry, it's a trick question. But, you think about it, if you don't have some focus on enjoyable results, you're never going to achieve it. But you have to do 80%, 90% of what you do should be something in your passion, something you enjoy. But between here and over here are something in the middle called the non-enjoyable activities. They're necessary to go all the way. So many times leaders are motivating their people to do what they're already motivated to do, what they enjoy. We need to motivate them with the why so that they do the things they don't enjoy. They're the non-enjoyable. I call those the necessary evils. They're the things that are absolutely necessary for us to achieve these results, but we have to do those. That's why some people, they come to work and they only want to work on the things they enjoy, but they never get to the results, because in anything that we do in life or business, there's always something that we have to do that we don't enjoy in order to achieve everything we want to achieve. So think about that. The more you motivate your people to do the things they don't enjoy, the more success you're going to get them over to hear the results. This is huge. The more you can do this, the more powerful a leader you will be. The why is very important, because the why motivates the people to do the things they don't enjoy. So the why greater than how is a very good equation to think about. And also think about the other way of defining the CEO, the Chief Explaining Officer. Their job is to explain the why, okay? So the more you have clarity on success, the more the clear picture you have, the more you're going to see things in life that will help you get there. Think about for yourself when, some of the younger people in terms of you'd like to get a new mobile phone, or you're looking at a new iPad or a device or something. You walk around the city and suddenly you see everybody who owns that phone or everybody who owns that iPad. You see it. You haven't seen it before because you weren't focusing on it. But once you make it so powerful, clear in your mind, you tell your subconscious mind what to do. And your subconscious mind points it out to you. With my wife, it's sometimes like the handbag or the coat she wants to buy sometime. She points it out on the street to me. That's the one I want to buy, or so forth, because it was a focus of what she was doing. Okay? So the more you have a clear picture, you engage both sides of your mind. Okay? And the subconscious mind is so powerful. If I was to ask you, what percentage of your behaviors is driven by your conscious mind or your subconscious mind? What percentage do you think is driven by your conscious mind? Any idea? How many say at least 50%? No? Few. How many say at least 25%? Oh, a lot more? How many say it's less than 10? A few more hands. It's actually 4% of your behaviors is driven by your conscious mind. 96% of your behaviors is driven by your subconscious mind. So if you're not clear consciously, you don't have a prayer subconsciously because you're not telling your subconscious what to do. It's almost like a parent and a child. Okay? So clarity of success is extremely important as a mindset. The other thing is to create an environment for collaboration. The more you have collaboration, the more you have glue in an organization, the more successful you're going to be. And glue, when it comes down to 3 parts. The first part is trust. The second part is information sharing. And the third part is common processes. When I was a leader, we used to have a brainstorm every quarter. We asked a question of our leadership team, how is our glue? How are we doing in terms of the right level of trust, information sharing, and common processes? And the first 2 are very, very important. Information, the trust and information. If I was to ask each of you, and raise your hand, could your organization be successful if your people were only following company-defined and documented processes? Could they be successful? No hands. It's the informal processes that make you successful. It's the trust and information sharing that enables your informal processes to work in any company. And trust is really around getting people to know each other. They only need to know one thing about each other. I heard a story about Angelina Jolie. You know Angelina Jolie of Brangelina? Yeah? Everybody knows? I heard she was interviewed by Larry King. And Larry King asked her an interesting question. How do you play a role that is totally opposite than you are? And Angelina Jolie said, I look for the one thing in common, however small, and I start with that. When you know something about some other person personally, you have a foundation for trust. You have a foundation to pick up the phone and call them because you can always talk about your common interest before you talk about work. Extremely powerful, okay? So leaders, the number one thing we need to think about is trust. One of the best persons in the world about this is Patrick Lencioni. He wrote a book called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. It's a fable, it's a story, it's not a traditional business book. And he says, if you do not have trust in your organization, you go back to working on that as a number one priority. Because trust and information flow is enabling you to enable those informal processes. It's all about collaboration. You cannot write processes strict enough to drive success. You need this informal information. So build trust and enable the glue in your organization, and you get much more collaboration, and you get people being open and honest. Because people that are trusting each other aren't afraid to bring up an issue. People who are not trusting each other are afraid to bring up an issue, and often the meetings are very happy, no one argues with each other, but people are not really saying what they're feeling. Okay? And the last one here in terms of the mindset is deliver. Often I had people, and I was guilty of this early in my career, I go to my boss and I'd say, I need this and this to deliver. The most successful people, they deliver first. And then they ask their boss for other things and so forth. So you get a lot of respect and leverage with other people by first doing what you commit to, deliver first, and then people will listen to how and what you need to even improve what you're delivering right now. So the more you can do that, the more successful you'll be. But also, related to delivery is managing the and. We had a little bit of that from the other speakers too, we said. Success in leadership is a matter of managing the critical and parts of the job. You have to be results-oriented and people-focused. You have to deliver in the short term, but you also have to be focused about building capabilities for the long term. You have to lead with your head, but you also need your heart. You have to lead people to take risks, but you also need to manage the risks. The most successful leaders are successful at managing the and. The unsuccessful ones will focus on either side. So leadership success is not an or situation. It's not I'm going to be results-oriented only, and you can forget the people. So the more you think of this, the more you manage the ands effectively, the more successful leader you will be, because you have to do both. Okay? But deliver first, which now gets people listening for you, but deliver, but also manage the end. Okay? So that's the mindsets. Now let's talk about personal ownership. Personal ownership is leading yourself. So it begins with you understanding you. The more you understand yourself, the more you can adapt your style to other people. The less you understand yourself, the more you can't adapt, and everybody is different. Everybody is motivated in different ways. So in essence, your emotional intelligence as a leader and how you handle your emotions and how you can adapt is what makes you successful. Okay? And as a leader, you're in show business. Your behaviors often are really defining what your priorities are and everything and so forth, more than what you say. There's a former leader of the BBC named Greg Dyke. He made an interesting comment. When he was leading it a few years ago, he said, I could walk into any BBC location, and how I greet the security people, how I talk to everybody in the building, what I'm interested in, what I ask about. Often the stories about my behavior circulate the building before I even leave the building at the end of the day. The stories your people tell about you on what you said, what you do, your focus, they communicate through the organization much faster than anything you write as a leader and anything you say as a leader. Okay? And also, we have to be very clear about what we're working on as a leader and what we're proving, what we're trying to improve. Your people want to know, they really want to know that you know what things you need to work on and so forth. I don't know if you've heard the name John Maxwell before or not. John Maxwell, he's sold over 20 million books in the United States as a leadership consultant, and he's a former minister. But he does seminars for CEOs, and he was impressing upon the CEOs that you should tell your people what you're working on. You know, the sort of things in your character and so forth that you're working on. And so they know that you're trying to improve that. And then one of the CEOs comes up after the break and says to John Maxwell, says, you know, I really feel uncomfortable, you know, telling my people what I'm not good at. And John Maxwell says a comment back to him. He says, I think you're working to the wrong assumptions. And the CEO says, what do you mean? You're assuming that your people don't already know. They already know. They just want to make sure that you know. So the more you understand yourself, the more you can control your behavior. You have to lead yourself first to lead others successfully. Okay? And remember, you're in show business. Everything you do is very, very visible. The other one here is character. We heard about that with the last speaker, right? Character is so important. Charisma can attract people, but character keeps them with you. And I'm gonna focus on just the five key elements here of character. And the first one is attitude. And I'm going to tell you a story which illustrates this. There was an elderly woman moving from one retirement home to another. So they're walking down the new retirement home, and the person from the home is describing the room to her. They're describing, you have a beautiful room, you look out into the courtyard, there's plenty of trees and flowers, you have plenty of room for your clothing, it's nicely decorated, you have a TV with all the different channels and so forth to see. And as they're walking to the room, the elderly woman says, I'm going to love it. And the guy from the home says, how can you say that? You haven't even seen it yet. She said, my attitude is something that I determine ahead of time. Okay? If you're a leader, you should never surrender leadership of your attitude to your people, the circumstances you come in and so forth. The leader should set the attitude they want to have before they start the day. So your attitude is something that you should always determine ahead of time and keep. Never surrender leadership of your attitude. I do some sessions for top management, and at the end of the day, I ask them, what one change can you do that would make a dramatic difference for you? Sometimes some top managers will say, I should never surrender leadership of my attitude to my people. Okay? Second one, the third one is discipline and commitment. You've never seen an undisciplined, successful person. They could be totally undisciplined in what doesn't make them successful. But what makes them successful, their discipline, and the level of commitment shows up on the actions and the decisions they take. If you ever want to lose kind of your group and not having them following so closely, whenever you slow down taking decisions or you slow down taking actions, your people interpret that this is no longer as important as before. So they're very visible, they're monitoring you, they're watching you. You slow, you take a little bit more time on a certain decision, they view it as not as a priority. So discipline to do the necessary thing, in fact, discipline to do those necessary evils. If they see you doing it as a leader, even the things you don't like, it encourages your people to do the things they don't like as well. Okay? So discipline and commitment. The other one is empathy. If I learned this approach to empathy when I was younger doing those implementations, I would have more hair today and I would have less gray hair. But there's a huge difference, and it relates to ownership, of being responsible for someone and being responsible to someone. As a leader, we're never responsible for our people because we can never take on the responsibility of their life. But we are responsible to them. We're responsible to help them grow. We're responsible to help them be successful and help them improve. So I had the attitude early on in my career that I'm responsible for. I start to take their problems on me, and I slow down. And then I changed it around. I said, I'm responsible to them. If they have an issue, I think of the actions I can take to help them versus taking their problems this way. So the sort of the mindset is going this way. How can I help them versus taking the problems on me? It's a huge difference. Empathy is extremely important, but you will struggle as a leader if you're not focused on how you can help them versus just taking that responsibility from them. You cannot be responsible for someone else, you're responsible to them. And the last one is integrity. We heard that from the last presentation. Integrity is an interesting one because it's a quality that guarantees all your other qualities. So think of integrity like a dam that's preventing water from moving forward. Each of us have sort of cracks in our integrity. We have certain things we wish we wouldn't do. If we're focused on working on those cracks, they never become holes and they go through. But if we're not focused on that, it could harm us because if we have a lack of integrity in something small, it raises a question for everything else. That's why it's so important to be on our best behavior as leaders in how we do everything. Because small things or small cracks in integrity visible to our people raises kind of a question mark. And then you lose some influence as a leader. Okay? Basically, when you think of character, character means that you are going to do the right thing regardless of the circumstances you find yourself in. Okay, so no matter what, you are going to be consistent and you're going to do the right thing. Okay? As you rise, as we heard for the last speaker, as you rise, your character is what keeps you up there. It's extremely important. Okay? And the last one is keeping your perspective here in personal. You have to balance your stress in life, and you have to keep your perspective on things because if you don't keep your perspective, you tend to view or magnify your problems in the wrong way. Many of you have had maybe a difficult day, but you went home, you had a nice evening with the family, or you went out with friends, or you played your favorite sport, your favorite passion. You came back into work, and the problem didn't look as big because you gained perspective. In essence, this is really around, making recovery a habit. And recovery, I'm going to tell you a story how this illustrates from years and years ago. Anybody watch tennis on TV or been to tennis matches? Look at it. You ever notice when people are waiting to receive a serve on a tennis match, they're playing with the racket all the same way, or every time they're doing something exactly the same way? Do you know that is by design? Because when you have a ritual and you do something the same way all the time, whether it's set point or just a regular point, it sends a signal to your body that this is normal. What they did 20 years ago or so, maybe 25 now, is they put a heart monitor on the #1 tennis player who had this ritual. And 25 years ago, not everybody had it, and they put a heart monitor on the 150th player, and they had them play a tennis match. And they measured the 20 to 25 seconds when you're waiting for the next serve and you have this ritual. The person with the ritual had about 10 beats less of the heart during those 20 to 25 seconds. The person who didn't have the ritual was much higher. Which one of these do you think would have more energy at the end of the match? The one who had the ritual, right? So, a normal day will be fine. But if you had a high-pressure day, but you do something normal during that high-pressure day, your body will help you keep the stress down. And in some ways, stress is like this glass. It fills with water. Your stress goes up and up and up. If it went overflowed, you say something you wish you didn't want to say. As a leader, that could hurt you for a few months. But if you do some type of recovery or something which brings down the stress, it makes room for more stress and you never really overflow. So the most successful people, they put some type of recovery into their life, either a ritual or something big like going and exercising or a dinner with the family, but it always reduces the stress, which allows you to take more on. It's extremely important to have an integrated life. You focus both on all the things that you'd like to do outside of work, and put it in together this way. Okay. Now, enabling ownership in others. You have personal ownership yourself, but you have to get your people to take personal ownership as well, or to lead themselves. The first thing is to focus on your key people. I don't know if you've read a book years ago. There's a book called First Break All the Rules. It was written by Marcus Buckingham, and he studied, at the time he worked for Gallup, and they studied, I think, something like 80,000 leaders and millions of people who reported to these leaders. And they came up with some key findings about successful managers and leaders. The most successful leaders focus on their key people. And they get their key people to help the others. And the more your key people know the why, the more they're going to help you lead your organization. Because the key people in your organization are the extension of you when you are not there. Okay? They're the change agents, they're the influencers, etc. So the more you're focused on your key people, the more you get your key people to coach and mentor the rest, the more successful you'll be as a leader. I had it wrong when I started leading. I thought my key people don't need as much help. I will help the others. But if I slow down the growth of my key people, I slow down the success of my organization. And I don't grow more leaders. The more I grow the key people, the more leaderships I'm growing in my organization. So it's extremely important to think as a leader to focus on your key people. Now, as a really kind of a leadership technique, your key people, you focus on them at a time that's convenient for them because they are creating the success for you. Your problem people, you deal with them at a time that's convenient for you. The best time to ask your problem people to come visit you is 10 minutes before lunchtime or 10 minutes before quitting time. They will not spend more than 10 minutes in your room. Ask them to come at 10 a.m. or 2 p.m., and they might be in your room for an hour. Okay? This changed my life as a leader when I did this, because you're developing change agents and you're developing more leaders when you focus your time as a leader on growing your best people. They are creating the success for you. Okay? The next one is to delegate outcomes and ask questions. Now let me ask you a question here, okay? Two people are having a conversation. One person is asking all the questions. One person is giving all the answers. Who controls the conversation? How many say the people giving the answers controls the conversation? A few. How many say the people asking the questions? Okay, a little bit more. The people asking the questions control the conversation. They control the direction of the conversation. Now let me ask you another question. If you're a leader and you only are answering your people's questions all day long, they are in control of every conversation with you. Does that sound good? Not so good, right? Let me ask you another question. If you're a leader and you only are answering your people's questions all day long, they are in control of every conversation with you. Does that sound good? Not so good, right? The leadership power is in your questions, not in your answers. Some leaders think the power comes from the answers they give. Power comes from the questions you ask. Peter Drucker said, leadership and management in the past was giving the answer. Now it's understanding the right question. But think about this. For all your people, especially your key people, for every time you give an answer for which you could have asked a question, you save them from thinking. If you save them from thinking, you save them from growing. So your power is more in your questions than in your answers. Okay? And let me ask you a question too here. Which would they have more ownership in? Your answer or their answer? How many say your answer? None. Good. How many say their answer? Yeah. Basically, a leader's job is to define the outcomes and even define it with your team, right? And ask them questions about how they're going to get there. And some of the best questions you can ask is, what are the key milestones towards achieving what I need to achieve? What are the key milestones there? Because if they give you milestones, they will have a lot more ownership in their milestones than your milestones. There's a successful former billionaire, former millionaire in 7 different industries. And he said one of the most powerful things he learned early in his career, in fact, he won the Entrepreneur of the Year award twice in the US. He said, I learned to always ask my people for the milestones. They have so much more ownership in their milestones than my milestones. Okay? So the key thing here is delegate outcomes, something that needs to be achieved, and ask questions. Let me ask you another question. If you delegate an activity, who owns the outcome for that activity? Does the person you delegated the activity to, or do you own it? Yeah, as a leader, you own it. So whenever you're delegating activities, you as a leader own the achievement. We have to be delegating outcomes because we want them to get to own the achievement. So very powerful. Ask yourself at the end of each week, say to yourself, how has been my balance of questions and answers? Because in leadership, remember we said it's the and. You're going to have to give answers sometimes as well, but it's how you manage that. At the end of each week, the amount of questions you ask should be greater than the answers you've provided. It's a very good question to ask yourself at the end of each week. Okay? The other one here is adapting your style of communication. 2 things on this one, and I'll tell you a couple stories, but let me ask you a question. How would my talk be today if I never told you a single story and I never gave you a single example? Someone said up front here, boring. If you're a leader and you're never telling your people examples or stories, you are boring them. When you're just giving them information, they're not getting it right away. Look at every successful speaker, and what they will do is just tell you story after story after story and add some information to it. So communication-wise, stories and examples are powerful, but they're also powerful for another reason. Let's say that this lectern right here is a person's mindset. So based on their experiences, their life experiences, their business experience, it's about this big. But I'm telling them information that's out here. If I tell them this information, they'll look at me and say, I don't believe you, because they can't really relate it. But if I tell them a story or an example which covers that, and then I tell them the information, they now believe it. Because they believe the example, they believe the information I'm telling. So if you're a leader and you want to expand people's mindsets, you have to start with stories and examples before you give them the information. It's so critical to do that. The other thing here is you have to adapt your style of communication. And I'll tell you a story which illustrates this, kind of an interesting one, and a true story but funny. 25 years ago, there was a consortium between Toshiba, Japanese company, Siemens, German company, and IBM, American company. And they found culturally how you give discipline. If you've done something wrong, you know, how it's done in each culture. Okay? They start off with the American. The American, they used the analogy of a hamburger to illustrate the differences in the cultures. The Americans start off with top bun. How you doing? How's everything? How's the family? Then they give them the meat. You know, you screwed up here. You had a problem. Don't do it again. Then they give you bottom bun. Don't worry, John over here will help you. The Germans, there is no bun. You only get meat. Do this and again and you die. The Japanese, you only get the bun. You have to smell the meat. They're so indirect. And that's how they described it. But that's how we have to communicate to people. Some people like more small talk before you get into business. Some people want to get right to business. You have to adapt your approach to other people. You know, have you heard the golden rule said, do unto others as you would like to be done unto? That's a disaster in communication. I should not communicate to people how I would like to be communicated to. I should communicate to them how they would like to be communicated to. So we always have to adapt our approach. So the interesting thing for India is say, how do we create the sandwich in India? Is there a lot of meat, the bun? How would you create it? But you have to make that individual to each person. The person in the United States, he created what they call the platinum rule. Do unto others as they would like to be done unto. That is number one for communication as a leader. Okay? So you really have to understand people's personalities, and you have to adapt your approach each time. As one consultant said to me just 2 weeks ago, he said, successful leaders are consistently different. In other words, they're always taking a different approach with each individual to motivate them the way they want to be motivated, to talk to them the way they would like to be talked to. In essence, they're constructing the hamburger a different way each time. Okay? So now let's talk about enabling organizational ownership. The first one is around creating principles, shared principles and shared outcomes. The more everybody understands where you're going and what you want to accomplish, the more you're going to get the teamwork aligned towards there. But that's not enough, because you need shared principles and you need shared values for the people and so forth. And they need to be consistent behaviors. And I'll tell you a story, a true story, about what Clive Woodward did. Clive Woodward was the coach of the World Cup rugby team in the UK when they won the World Cup. Now, he used to be a sales manager for Xerox, so he instituted some sort of business coaching and different principles there. But he had certain behaviors or principles that the team needed to follow, but he did not want to create the rules. He wanted the team to create the rules. So he called these teamship rules, and he asked the team to define the rule for them, and then he would agree with it or not. The interesting thing is they defined one of the specific rules, which was timekeeping. What does on time mean if you come to a practice or you come to a meeting or so forth for the team? Now, when the team came back, they said on time was 10 minutes before the meeting starts. If you're not there, you're late. And what happened is when the team defines the rules, if someone comes late, he did not have to say anything to them. Another team member said something to them. So as a leader, the more you let the team define some of the principles, they will kind of police themselves, and less effort has to come from you. That creates teamwork and collaboration this way. So principles, they drive team behavior. So the more you let them define it as a team, the more they will police themselves on it. Less effort from you, more effort across them. Okay? The other one here, extremely important, is peer pressure and interdependence. Let me ask you another question. Which is more powerful in terms of driving people's behavior and performance? Manager or leader to employee, or employee to employee? How many people say leader to employee is more powerful? Nobody. Good. How many say employee to employee is more powerful? Great. Raise your hands. Peer pressure is huge for a leader. For everything that you can make performance visible for the organization as a whole, the more you create peer pressure, it means less time that has to come from you, the leader, downward. If you're putting less pressure to get things done from you, that means you as a leader can look into the future and develop more things that way. That means you want to make performance, both good and bad performance, visible so that no one really hides. The more you create peer pressure in a virtual environment, the more control over your organization you have. The less you have peer pressure, the less you have a problem. The more you have a problem, and the more time that has to come, they will naturally become a team. And I'm going to tell you an actual story from my own career. I was asked to take over 6 customer service locations in Europe. They were reporting to a local manager before me. Now they were reporting to a European manager. And my responsibility was to drive from 6 locations to 1 location in Europe. I needed each 6 leaders to work together on something that was critical. So what I did, for each geographic leader, I gave a pan-European project or responsibility to drive. So the person in France had all electronic information exchange. The person in Spain had all the credits and adjustments. The person in Germany had all equipment processes. So each 6 of the managers had a European responsibility to drive. So they needed help from all the other 5 to deliver what they needed to do. So they had to become a team because their success was based on how well they worked together with the other 5. When I left Kodak from this job, they said to me, "Thank you very much. You made us a team." And they get along very, very well. I said to them, "I did not make you a team. I created the structure by which you made yourself a team." This is huge. If you can create interdependence, people needing each other to be successful, they will create a team naturally. And your job as a leader is to help them be successful on their project. You can do it in any type of organization. Let's say you have 4 different locations. You can ask each location to do something on behalf of the whole group, design a new processes, etc. They have to work together. Now the beauty of this is not only did the leaders become a team, but the people below them became a team. Because the leader doesn't do all the work, they delegate down. So now you had teamwork not only at the leader level, but you had teamwork at the lower levels as well. So here's something where a leader can set a structure up for people needing each other to be successful, and coach and help people be successful, and it's less time for a leader to drive that teamwork. Okay? So it's magic. When people need each other to be successful, they will become a team automatically. And the last one here is in terms of driving, to play the game of positive politics. You know, politics has a dirty word all the time in business, but politics is natural. You know, you have politics in your families and everything in terms of differences, opinions, and things like this. Politics, to be successful in business, is creating strong business friendships. And as we heard this morning, the stakeholders are very, very important. In fact, if you're going into any new job, the first thing you would do is identify all the key stakeholders and people where you need strong business relationships with, and you should start working on it right away. So it's so important to focus on building the relationships. And the key is this. If you do not play the politics correctly at the top level, and people need to deal with an issue at the lower level, they will resent you for that. Because you did not have strong relationships here, they have to do something operationally which is not so attractive. So you have to give your people, if I use the airplane analogy, you have to give your people air cover. The more you give them air cover, the more they can get things done. Okay. 2 things we're going to do, and I'll finish. A quick summary. Focus on outcomes. Have your language as a leader in the language of achievement, not the language of busyness. Be self-aware. Understand yourself. Work on the things. Work on the sort of the cracks in the dam and make sure that they do not become holes. Delegate outcomes and ask questions. Don't delegate activities. Peer pressure is very important in interdependence, and provide your people air cover. Okay? Now I'm going to leave you with one particular question. This question comes from a sales trainer and speaker in the United States. He was doing a sales training, and in the front row was a very young, energetic salesperson, came up after the training and said, "I love what you did. Do you have a slogan to motivate myself every day?" He said, "I don't have a slogan, but I have this question. How would the person I'd like to be do the things I'm about to do?" 5 years later, the same trainer is back giving a keynote speech to the same organization. Now, between number 5 and number 2, in terms of performance for the salespeople, there wasn't much difference. There was a huge difference between number 2 and number 1. The number 1 salesperson was a person sitting in the front row 5 years earlier. The speaker said, "How did you get there?" He said, "All I did was ask that question of myself each and every day." Because when you aspire to act like the person you'd like to be, it's only time before you become that person if you create the habits of that person. It's very, very powerful. And you can't wait for the inspiration. I'll leave you with 2 types of people in the world. There's people who let their feelings drive their behaviors, and there's people who let their behaviors drive their feelings. Which one do you think is more successful? Feelings drive behaviors? How many say that? Few. Behaviors drive feelings. How many say that? More. It's your behaviors driving the feelings. For the most important things in life, sometimes, the inspiration comes only after we take action. The behavior of action creates the inspiration to finish it. So if you're not the person who's taking the action, you're behind the person who's taking the action, because the inspiration comes afterwards. Okay. So if you were to saw my PC, and you were to see my wallpaper, that question is all over my PC wallpaper to remind myself. When you act like the person, you create the behaviors like the person you would like to be, it's only time before you become that person. Thank you very much for your attendance.
Thank you, Mark. And thank you for the very insight of what and why and how's about the leadership and its leaders. We have the question answer session now. Because of the lack of time, we would only be taking 2 questions. Okay. The first question that comes is from a student of SVITS. He says, "Do you think that the change is always positive?"
Change for everybody will look positive or negative, depending on your perspective and where you are in that particular change. And change always has an evolution until you go through that. And sometimes changes in what we need to do will feel negative to us until we get out the other end, like creating a new habit. The thing is that, as you heard from other speakers, change is a constant. So we're always going to have to live with change. We figure out how can we make it work best for us and have the right perspective towards it. I think that's the key.
Wonderful. Mark, we have one more question, though I don't know whether it's for politicians or for you, but I'll still give it to you. It says, how could you define politics, a positive game, while it is always played as negative? It's from a student again.
I think, we're missing some role models sometimes when we think about politics in that way. But I think as long as we live to our values and we work within our values, then we're confident and we become a better role model for other people at the same time. But I think the whole political structure kind of lends itself to people acting that way, and there's no boundaries around it. But I think the world changes when we each start and do our part. So I think what we need to do is determine what our values are and work within ours first. Yeah.
Thank you, Mark.